She's unstable. I gave her that house out of pity. That's what Brent said on local TV. And the whole town believed him. They didn't see what Marlene found beneath the rotting floorboards, a locked cellar, an old moonshine still, and a legacy too powerful to stay buried. Now with the town turning against her and a lawsuit threatening everything she has left, Marlene has one choice: stay quiet or fight back. Before we dive in, let me know. What time are you listening to this and where are you? Drop a comment below, we'd love to hear from you. The webs weren't coming off easy. They clung to the corners of the low-ceiling threads, layered so thick they felt more like fabric than silk. Marlene flicked her wrist harder, the broom scraping wood until dust showered down and stung her eyes. She blinked it away and kept sweeping. Drizzle murmured against the tin roof. Not a storm, just the slow kind of rain that soaks through everything. Toby sat at the wobbly kitchen table, stacking paperbacks beneath one leg to stop it from rocking. His hood was still up, though they hadn't been out for an hour. A crack ran through one of the windows like lightning. She could have sworn it hadn't been there yesterday. A bicycle bell rang faintly, followed by the squeal of brakes. Marlene glanced out. A woman in a plastic rain poncho stood at the porch rail with a brown paper sack. "You're the new folks?" the woman asked, voice louder than necessary. Marlene nodded. The woman leaned her bike against a post and held out the bag. "Some apples from my tree. Nothing fancy." "Thank you," Marlene said, her hand brushing the wet paper. The woman hesitated. "Just don't expect kindness from everyone around here. Not right away." Then she was gone, wheels crunching over gravel. Dinner was canned soup and toast burned on one side. Toby spooned quietly, eyes fixed on the flickering light overhead. "If Dad didn't want this house," he asked, after a while, "why do we have to live in it?" Marlene didn't answer. Her gaze lifted to the ceiling stain, dark and branching like roots spreading from the corner. She stared until her soup went cold. Later, she took the shovel and stepped to the rain barrel. The drizzle had softened parts of the yard, but the back lot stayed uneven, her boots sinking into mud. Beyond the shed, something odd caught her eye. A rectangular slab of cement cracked and patched with stones and soil. Grass refused to grow there. She tested it with her boot. Solid. She drove the shovel in once. Nothing. Again. The third time the blade struck something hidden. A dull knock-knot stone. Not root. Something man-made. The memory of that digging lingered, her hands still aching as she sat stiffly on the courthouse bench. The place smelled of old wax and polish, a scent that clung, no matter how much she wished it wouldn't. Knees pressed, tight coat buttoned to the throat despite the warmth inside, she kept her gaze lowered. Her lawyer leaned close, whispering strategy, maybe comfort, but the words slid past her. Across the aisle, Brent leaned back in his seat suit, crisp jaw, clean-shaven, like he was preparing for an interview. Miriam sat behind him, handbag clasped, shoes gleaming lipstick, the same coral shade she had worn on Marlene's wedding day, somewhere between brightness and condescension. The room buzzed with whispers. Small-town courtrooms offered no privacy. People came to watch, to take sides, to pretend they didn't already know. Marlene recognized too many faces: a neighbor who once borrowed sugar, the pastor's wife, even the man who used to repair her car. None of them looked her way. The judge adjusted his glasses, thick frames that pinched his face into something non-committal. "Let's move on to the division of assets," he said, tone flat. Marlene's attorney, a younger man from the next county over, stood and passed a folder to the bailiff. "Your Honor, we're presenting evidence the defendant transferred shared funds into private accounts without disclosure. We've included a timeline and bank statements." The judge barely skimmed the top page before shaking his head. "Is there verification from the financial institution?" "No, sir. We requested documents, but the bank's response is still pending." "Then this is speculation. It's patterned behavior." "We believe you can believe what you like, counselor," the judge said, "but I need documentation. Tangible evidence. Until then, the court will not consider financial misconduct." Marlene's lawyer sat down with a quiet sigh. Her chest tightened. She should have spoken, corrected the record, told the judge what she'd found on Brent's laptop late at night while he slept beside her. The silent transfers. The ghost accounts. Instead, her mouth stayed shut, heavy as stone. Brent rose, one hand smoothing his tie. "I'm not looking to make this ugly," he said, voice smooth. "She can have full custody of our son, And as a gesture of good faith, I'm signing over the deed to my father's old cabin. She'll need a place to live." The gallery murmured a ripple that sounded too much like admiration. The judge nodded. "Noted." Marlin didn't lift her head. Brent's gaze pressed against her, the kind of stare that measured silence, not kindness. The gavel struck. The session ended. People shuffled out, coats, rustling footsteps echoing against tile. She remained seated until the room cleared. When she finally stepped into the hallway, the chill struck her like breath withheld too long. She leaned against the wall, dizzy with shame and something colder. Miriam approached, heels tapping with precision. She paused just inches away, voice lowered. "You think you won," she said. "That cabin. It's a husk. My father-in-law bought it on borrowed money. And that underground room that wasn't ours belonged to a man named Martin Hale, some fool who vanished during the war. Should have been bulldozed decades ago." Marlin blinked. Miriam's smile never touched her eyes. "Don't let the town laugh at you too long, dear." Then she was gone. Outside, the parking lot was nearly empty. Clouds hung low, threatening rain but never releasing it. Gravel shifted under Marlin's steps as she moved toward her car. The envelope from her lawyer was bent now, smudged at the edges. She opened it, scanning the familiar legalese, title documents, custody agreements. At the bottom, one page stood out, yellowed, faded. Handwriting, not print. In the lower corner, barely visible in blue ink, Martin Hale. The wind picked up. The page fluttered from her hand. She caught it, folded everything, and tucked the envelope under her arm. Her other hand closed around the key Brent had slid across the bench without a word, no ceremony, like a tip. She slipped it into her coat pocket, fingertips brushing the cool metal before letting go. Across the lot, trees lined the road. Beyond them, hills folded into one another, disappearing into gray. Somewhere in that expanse sat the cabin. She didn't start the car right away. Instead, she stood watching the branches sway, unsure if they urged her forward or warned her back. By dusk, she reached the cabin. Wind picked up, brushing leaves across the uneven back lot as she stepped from the car. The shovel bit into the soil with a wet crunch, pulling up layers of sodden earth and fractured cement. Marlene gritted her teeth as she worked along the cracked slab behind the shed, each strike loosening more of the surface. The slab had been crooked since the day they arrived. She told herself it was probably an old septic cover, maybe a utility cap. But the symmetry of the cement and the way the weeds bent away from it had started to crawl under her skin. Toby crouched nearby, poking a rusted nail into the dirt. Every few minutes he glanced her way but said nothing. Rain from the night before had left the ground soft but dense. She scraped until her wrist throbbed. Then the blade jarred against something buried. Not stone, not root, metal. She dropped to her knees, clawing at the soil with her hands. Mud clung in dark clumps. An edge appeared square and rigid. As she swept it clean, the outline of a door emerged, flat iron set into the ground like a hatch. A handle thick with rust curved upward, like a question waiting for its answer. Toby stood wiping his palms on his jeans. "That's not part of the house." "No," Marlene answered quietly. He stepped closer. "Are you going to open it?" She hesitated. A smell rose from the edge of the metal, earth, mildew, and something sharper. "If you don't want to," Toby offered, "I can try." His voice carried no challenge, no fear, only calm, curious concern. Marlene wrapped her fingers around the handle. It stuck, groaned, then gave with a sudden jolt. Hinges shrieked as years of silence broke apart. A rush of cold, damp air surged upward. Mixed in was a scent she hadn't known in years, sweet, biting, with a bitterness that clung to the throat. Alcohol. A wooden staircase dropped into darkness. Narrow, steep, hand-built. She drew a steady breath. "Stay close." They moved together, her boots careful on each step. Toby lighter behind her. The walls were rough beams, scattered nails, webs stretched across corners. At the bottom, the space widened to a room perhaps 12 feet across. The ceiling forced her to duck. Air hung dense, unmoving. Shelves crowded every wall, stacked with dusty jars, cloudy bottles, coils of copper tubing. In one corner sat a dented still linked to a scorched lid barrel. A distillery, untouched yet strangely preserved. Toby drifted toward a work table, eyes wide, fingers hovering near a crate of vials. "Is this moonshine?" She nodded. On the back wall, a slate board held faded notes, ratios, temperatures, markings blurred with age. Near the bottom, written in bold chalk strokes, one line stood out: "Not for those who wish to forget." She stared longer than she meant to. The slant of the words slightly left felt personal, as if the room itself watched. Toby tapped a dusty bottle. "Think it still works? We're not touching anything." She snapped more sharply than intended. His eyes dropped. She turned away. Her heartbeat hadn't slowed since they entered. The sharp tang of mash seeped from the boards, rising at the back of her mouth. Without another word, she climbed the stairs. In the kitchen, she twisted the faucet. Water ran brown for a few seconds before clearing. She thrust her hands beneath, scrubbing hard, then harder. Soap foamed thick across her palms. Rinsed. Lathered again. Still the smell clung. Earned like something that marked her. She pumped more soap, scrubbed until her knuckles stung. Toby stepped into the room. He didn't speak. He only sat at the table watching. She turned the water off but stayed where she was. Steam curled upward. Her hands pressed against the counter's edge. Silence crowded in. Later in the cellar, a crate sagged apart. Corners, rotted nails rusted outward like twisted thorns. Toby nudged it with his foot, then crouched, brushing away a web stretched across the handle. "There's something in here," he said. Marlene, still stacking bottles onto a shelf, glanced over. "Leave it. Probably mold." Toby ignored her. He pulled until the lid gave hinges, groaning as it flopped back. Amid rags and a cracked thermometer lay a small leather notebook, warped with age yet whole. He held it up. "You want this?" She hesitated, then crossed over and took it. The leather felt dry, almost brittle. Pages had curled at the edges, but ink remained: sharp notes, measurements, ingredient lists, distillation times, and reflections between batches. Midway, the handwriting shifted, sharper, more erratic. On the final page, a single line stood alone. "If you're reading this and still breathing long enough to choose, don't sell it. Make it." Marlene stared until the letters blurred. She shut the book quietly and slid it into her coat pocket. By afternoon, they were driving down the hill toward town. The truck rattled over potholes, radio low. Toby leaned on the window, chewing his cheek, silent since they'd left the cellar. At the library, Marlene approached the desk with the notebook in her hands. The man behind the counter looked older than the building eyebrows, like wire brushes, plaid shirt cinched too tightly at the waist. "I'm looking for someone," she said. "Name's Martin Hale. Might have lived near the ridge long time ago." The man squinted, pulled a binder from the shelf, and flipped slowly. His finger stopped. "Martin Hale," he muttered. "Now there's a name." She leaned in. "You knew him. I was a boy. My dad bought bottles off him during the drought years. Said the man made liquor so clean it could burn twice. Disappeared after the fire in '73. What fire old shack caught in the middle of the night. Folks said lightning. Some swore he lit it himself. No insurance. No body ever found." He shut the binder. "Why are you asking?" She shook her head. "Just curious." That night, Marlene set the notebook on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. Toby had gone to bed early, worn out from digging. The room was still except for the tick of the wall clock and the occasional pop from the wood burner. She opened to a page marked with a torn scrap. Pulling her chair closer, she studied the ratio of cornmeal. To water, memorized the timing for each boil, and traced Hale's margin notes, small adjustments like secrets he hadn't meant to share. In the shed, she found an old camping stove and a dented saucepan. She carried them to the counter and rolled up her sleeves. Movements came slow at first, uncertain. The smell of mash thickened in the air as she stirred and measured. When the mixture hissed against the hot metal, she didn't flinch. An hour later, she poured the result into a clean jar. Cloudy strong, probably off balance, but hers. Made by her hands. Not borrowed, not begged. She set it beside the notebook. A knock rattled the back door. Denny Cruz stood there, sleeves pushed up, a roll of pine under one arm, a tape measure swinging from his pocket. "Had some left over," he said. "Figured it might help with that busted stare." His gaze drifted past her to the jar on the table. "You find something down there." Marlene covered it with a dish towel before she thought about it, jaw tightening. He smiled, slow and unbothered. "Didn't say I disapproved. Just heard a rumor or two floating through town. You know how people are." She kept silent. He tilted his head. "You plan on selling it?" Her hand rested on the notebook. "Not yet." He nodded once he stepped forward. "Good. Some things are better when they stay small. By morning, she wrapped the jar in a thin towel, slipped it into a canvas bag, and paused before zipping it shut. Nothing flashy, no label, no branding, just masking tape scrawled in her hand. Batch 1, Pine Hill. The letters leaned slightly right, the same tilt she'd never broken. At the farmer's market, tents snapped in the breeze. Folding tables sagged with sweet potatoes, wildflower honey jams, secondhand tools. A bluegrass trio played under the oak tree at the edge of the lot, the fiddle player tapping his boot to keep time. It wasn't a place meant to impress, which suited her fine. She paid the booth fee in cash and set up a modest table near the gravel path. The jar sat in the center. She poured a sample into a paper cup, no sign, no pitch, just there, as if it had always belonged. For 20 minutes, no one came. Shoppers passed with polite nods, veering toward candles and peach preserves. She didn't blame them. She looked out of place. No cloth, no banner, no smile stretched too wide. Finally, an older woman with soft eyes and a bright scarf slowed beside the table. She leaned forward, sniffed, and lifted the cup. Moonshine. Marlin nodded. First batch. The woman sipped. Her face stayed unreadable for a moment, then softened into a grin. Tastes like the day I got married the first time, she said. He was a bootlegger, an idiot, but he knew how to toast. She chuckled, patted Marlin's hand, and moved on. Her words lingered longer than the taste. A few more followed, a man in overalls praising the bite, a young couple whispering to each other before leaving with smirks. Slowly the air warmed. Then a man in a red baseball cap hovered by the neighboring stall. He never came closer. Instead, he raised his phone chest high and snapped a photo. The shutter nearly lost under the crowd's hum, but Marlene heard it. She didn't react, only folded the towel back over the jar. The next morning, the thud of the newspaper on the steps made her flinch. Toby carried it in and set it beside her oats. The headline read, "Backwoods Booze is Moonshine Making a Comeback on Hartley Land." The photo caught her mid-laugh jar clear in frame. The tone mocked folksy charm, nostalgia for bootlegging, but laced with suspicion. One paragraph speculated the still wasn't permitted. Another hinted at questions around land ownership. She folded the paper hard, shoved it under the sink between grocery bags and forgotten mousetraps. By noon, a vehicle rumbled up the drive, dust curling in its wake. Through the screen, she saw Miriam, hairset, coat pressed, eyes sharp, standing at the front gate like she owned it. Neighbors slowed their steps, dogs in tow, pretending at mail checks. "I see you made the paper," Miriam called. "Should have known you couldn't stay quiet for long." Marlene stayed behind the screen. Toby stood close, worry etched across his brow. Miriam raised her voice, pitched for every ear nearby. "That liquor you're playing house with, that recipe was born on Hartley soil. My father's still, my family's barrels." Her hand gripped the gate as if she might shove it open. "You may have walked out of court with a key, but that doesn't make you heir to anything. You're squatting on history." Marlene eased the front door open, though she didn't step out. "You signed it over," she said. "That's the end of it." Miriam tilted her head, eyes gleaming. "Paper's not legacy, and that land has deeper roots than your little signature. You're playing with fire, sweetheart." She spun on her heel, gravel crunching, and marched to her car. After the engine faded, Toby tugged at Marlene's sleeve. "She's bluffing, right? She can't take it back." Marlene pressed her lips tight, breath thin. She gave no answer. Barefoot, she walked onto the warm planks and bent to pick up a rusted bottle cap on the stair-flattened coppery, stained like something broken. She turned it over in her palm. It told her nothing. Doubt followed her through the night. By morning, guesses weren't enough. She needed proof. The courthouse library smelled of lemon polish and pages untouched for decades. Marlene signed the visitor log with a borrowed pen and climbed the narrow staircase to the map archive. Oversized plat books leaned on wire rack stickers from the 1970s, peeling at the edges. She pulled out the thick green volume marked East Ridge, 1972. Pages creaked as she turned them. Every line was hand-drawn, faint pencil marks still visible where boundaries had shifted. There it was, parcel 24A, her land, and beside it a smaller sliver labeled 24B. No name, no crosshatch. Just a boundary hugging the back of the distillery lot like a forgotten thought. Pretending to text, she snapped a photo with her phone. At home, she unearthed the transfer papers Brent had shoved across the courtroom table. Parcel 24A, full transfer. No mention of 24B, no easements, no clarifications, only a stamp, a signature, and a vague legal description skirting the ridge's edge without crossing it. Sleep wouldn't come that night. The lamp burned past midnight shadows stretching across Martin's open notebook. One margin note read, "Check the southwest fence post, old man never fixed it right." At first light, Boots' lace jacket on, she found the post half buried in brambles, leaning wrapped with frayed orange survey tape. Beyond it, the ground sloped toward the distillery. Wind swept damp leaves along the path as she walked into town. On the corner of Maple and Thorn, Denny was repairing a porch swing. His hammer paused midair at the sight of her. "You ever hear about Parcel 24B?" she asked. He rubbed his neck. "That little sliver behind the old Hartley place belonged to a fella named Pike ages ago. Got folded into Hale's side when the county redrew lines in the 60s. Her mouth tightened. "Was it ever Hartley land?" He shook his head. "Not on record. But your ex's grandfather and Martin Hale had what you'd call a gentleman's agreement, verbal only. Hale kept the ridge, Hartley kept the well. When Hale disappeared, no one updated the books. Lines blurred." She glanced west. "Could someone claim it now?" "Depends who asks," Denny said, "and how loud they ask." That evening, Toby came downstairs, hair still damp from his shower. He lingered near the counter as Marlene scribbled shorthand notes only she could follow. "You're hiding it, aren't you?" She paused. The still, the jars, all of it. Setting the pencil down, she said, "Not hiding, just being careful." He frowned. "If you're not doing anything wrong, why be scared?" No answer fit. Not for a boy who still believed truth always won. She tried anyway. "Sometimes it's not about what's right, it's about who gets heard." Toby stared, then drifted away unsatisfied. Alone again, she sat with fingers wrapped around a glass she hadn't touched. The map replayed in her mind that sliver of land unclaimed yet never erased. No one forced her to continue. She could quit. Sell the jars, plant tomatoes, turn the cellar into storage. But something unnamed pushed back. Not rage, not revenge. Quieter, steadier. After dinner, she returned to the cellar. The notebook waited. She lit the stove, adjusted the flame, checked the mash twice before pouring it through the copper coil. The air filled with that sharp, warm scent, and this time she didn't flinch. On a sheet of brown butcher paper, she began recording ratios, timings, humidity. She underlined each entry the way Martin had. No flourish, just truth. Steam curled against the low ceiling. Her reflection warped but whole in the glass of the jar. 2 days later, the jar rode with her, wrapped in canvas, silent as contraband. The road curled like a lazy snake through the hills, summer dust trailing behind Denny's truck. Toby sat in the back legs, swinging a festival flyer, folded tight in his hands. Marlene kept one palm pressed against the bag in her lap, feeling the weight shift with each bump. She hadn't told anyone she carried it, not even Denny. The neighboring town buzzed with energy when they arrived. Streamers wrapped around streetlights and a bluegrass trio played beneath a banner, snapping in the wind, Moonshine and Memories, 42nd Annual. The air smelled of fried dough, pine smoke, and something sweet, maybe roasted peaches. Toby sprinted toward the ring toss without waiting. Denny jogged after him, laughing, already sunk into festival rhythm. Marlene stood still, taking it in the color, the chatter rolling through warm air like distant thunder. Her fingers tightened around the glass she carried. Curiosity, maybe pride, maybe both, she told herself that was all it was. Stalls lined the central path, each offering small pours labeled by hand, Hazel's Kick Midnight Tap, cricket fuel. Folks clinked, plastic cups laughed and leaned close, as if secrets themselves were the flavor. At the back row, under a canvas canopy stretched above folding tables, the tasting competition drew steady attention. Marlene hesitated, then eased the bottle from her bag, sliding it onto the edge of a table beneath a napkin. A woman with a long braid and a clipboard noticed. "You bringing something?" For judging her tone was brisk, not unkind. "No, just hoping someone with a real tongue might try it." The woman raised a brow. "You make it." Marlene nodded. "Let's see what you've got." She poured half an ounce into a cup, sniffed, then sipped. Seconds passed in silence as she smacked her lips, sorting something invisible. "Well, damn," she said at last. "Who taught you to breathe it off the flame like that?" "No one." Just notes I found. Someone named Hale. The woman's eyes sharpened. Martin Hale could be. Another sip. That's not beginner's luck. This isn't just decent, it's got echo. Most folks scorch the fruit or overrun the corn, but this has a line that carries through. You bring more. Marlin allowed herself a faint smile. Not today. Someone else approached and the woman turned away, but her words lingered echo, through line like a language Marlin hadn't known she spoke. She tucked the bottle back into the bag and wandered toward the games. Toby flung bent darts at balloons, missing everyone, but grinning as if he'd won. Denny bought him a caramel apple the size of his head and winked her way. They tried the corn maze next. She trailed behind laughing when Toby hit a dead end and refused to turn back until he solved it himself. Light filtered through tall stalks, catching in his hair until it glowed. By twilight, lanterns bloomed above the square, and music from the main stage carried louder. A crowd gathered for the final tasting vote. Marlene stayed at the fringe watching. That's when she saw him. Tall tan jacket standing half-shadowed near the lemonade stand. His face was forgettable, but the way he held his phone angled deliberate sent a cold shock through her. He didn't drink, didn't laugh, didn't speak, just pointed the lens at her. She turned, slightly feigning indifference, waited, then glanced back. Still there. Another click. Her pulse hammered. She reached instinctively for Toby's shoulder, but he was already chasing Denny toward the popcorn stand. When she looked again, the man was gone. The ride home didn't shake the unease. That night she never found sleep. Only the glow of her phone lit the kitchen. Marlene sat at the table, fists locked in her lap, bile sharp at the back of her throat. The Post had nearly 100 shares. Local woman revives, Hartley bootlegging. Legacy. But is it legal beneath the headline? A blurred photo showed her half-turn the bag at her side, with the jar just visible. Comments swarmed like wasps' figures. Trash runs in that family. Moonshine ain't moonshine if you steal the still. Isn't she the one who took the old Hartley place in the divorce? Her name wasn't even in the article. Just the ex-wife and a woman seen at the Moonshine Festival with a suspicious homemade sample. Denny had texted once, "Don't engage. Let it burn out." She never replied. At some point, Toby padded into the kitchen for water. He didn't speak at first, just opened the fridge and stared inside like he'd forgotten why he came. Then softly, someone drew on my locker. Marlene looked up. They wrote, "Thief's kid." His voice barely crossed the room. Her chest tightened. "Did you tell anyone?" Toby shrugged and shut the fridge. "No point. It's permanent marker." She reached toward him, but he stepped back. "It's okay, Mom. I told them we don't need their dumb school anyway." Then he was gone. She didn't follow. The hush that settled afterward pressed heavy like wet clothes against skin. She sat unmoving until even the hum of the fridge sounded like judgment. Eventually she rose. Floorboards sighed under her weight as she crossed to the cellar. Hinges complained when she pulled the door open. Cool air rose up a breath from another time. She descended slowly, fingers trailing the stone wall, as if tethering herself to something older than the present. The switch flickered twice before catching. Everything looked the same, coils of copper, tubing dusty jars lined in ranks, chalk scribbles faint on the wall. Yet tonight the place felt different, more hiding place than workshop. She pulled Martin Hale's notebook from the shelf and flipped through pages she knew by heart, formulas, diagrams, margin notes unraveling into sloppy scrawl near the end. The words wouldn't hold steady. Vision blurred not from fatigue, but from the sour pressure rising behind her ribs. Each line read like a dare she couldn't answer. The air carried a metallic bite, not copper, her own nerves. She dropped onto the wooden stool and let the book fall open. Fingers trembled, though the room wasn't cold. The house above creaked once, then stilled. Half an hour later, Denny's knock echoed through the floor. "You in there?" His voice came muffled, steady. "I saw the article. Half the town probably has. They'll move on. Just give it time." No answer. A pause, then quieter. "They don't care what's real. They just want you quiet." Another beat. "You know that, right?" Her gaze fixed on a smudge along the page. Ink or an old thumbprint, she couldn't tell. Pressure built behind her eyes until it burned. His voice again. "You okay?" She exhaled and finally spoke barely loud enough to carry, "Maybe I should be quiet." Upstairs remained still. No retreating boots, no closing door, just silence stretching in every direction. Her eyes roamed the cellar, the jars, the curled copper, the chalkboard with Martin's warning, "Not for the ones who want to forget." She whispered it aloud, the words dry on her tongue. Then stood. A drip echoed behind the barrels. She tilted her head, listening. Maybe condensation, maybe not. Still, she walked toward it. With every step, the air pressed heavier, not from dust, but from memory. Memory that clung to bone. She stopped before the copper pot, still laid a hand on the rim, then pulled back. The metal felt like skin. One part of her longed to smash it all. Another quiet insistent urged her to light the burner. So she remained there, caught between ruin and ignition, surrounded by the ghosts of another man's choices, wondering how long before they became her own. By dawn, the cellar was quiet again. Toby crept down the stairs before dawn. The air clung to his skin, damp still, thick with wood and metal. On the work table lay the notebook, where Marlin had left it, half open, its spine softened from use. He turned it gently, noticing the thickness of the back cover. A faint line caught his eye, an extra layer pressed into the binding. Careful not to tear it, he slid a dull paring knife beneath the lining. A flap gave way with a dry crackle, revealing a folded slip of paper, flattened like a secret. His hands shook as he opened it. Hours later, the page sat under a coffee mug on the kitchen table. Marlene skimmed the top line again and again, trying to make sense of it. Transfer of usage rights. Parcel 12B, from Martin Hale to Ellis Carter, July 14, 1972. A signature, Hale's, firm, clean, and below it another name, Ellis Carter. Toby hovered beside her. "Is it important?" She didn't answer. Instead, she rose and reached for her coat. The town library reeked of dust and silence. Miss Greaves, who looked as though she'd been shelved there decades ago, peered through thick lenses. "Ellis Carter," she repeated, typing slowly. "Lived on the outskirts, unmarried, no record of children. Died in 91, no will." Then what happened to the land? Greaves tilted her head. "Without probate, it should have gone back to the county. But doesn't look like anyone processed it. Been sitting untouched on paper for 30 years. Marlin pressed her fingers to her jaw, meaning Brent's family never had a legal claim. The librarian met her eyes, meaning a lot of people made assumptions. That's not the same thing as ownership. Rain misted down as Marlene stepped outside, silvering the trees. She didn't hurry. Boots splashed through shallow puddles past shuttered antique stores and rusted pumps, the town peering from behind windows as always. Back home, Denny sat on the porch, elbows on his knees, steam rising from a half-finished cup of coffee. She handed him the document without a word. His jaw tightened as he read. For a long while, he said nothing. "They never filed a claim," she said finally. "Doesn't matter unless someone pushes it." He leaned back against the siding. "You're one woman with a page from a dead man's book. They've got lawyers' money and the town's ear. But it proves the Hartleys were bluffing. All of it, the house, the threats, her shouting through my gate, it was built on nothing." "Truth doesn't change how people react," he replied quietly. "You think anyone wants to admit they backed the wrong family for 40 years? Marlin rubbed her forehead. "Then what am I supposed to do? Keep quiet and let them win again?" "But if you speak, you'd better have someone who'll echo it loud enough." Her eyes flicked toward the cellar. "Someone like Martin." "Martin's gone. There's got to be someone else who knew. Someone who saw the transfer." "Maybe." He looked down the road where wet branches sagged. But digging in the past stirs dust nobody wants in their lungs. From the window, Toby called about dinner. Denny returned the paper. "Keep that safe. It's not enough by itself." She nodded, throat too tight to answer. That night, after dishes and bedtime stories and checking every lock twice, she descended to the cellar alone. Her flashlight swept over the copper still. The chalkboard loomed in the corner, formulas faint but lingering. She opened the notebook, slid the hidden page back into place, and closed it like sealing something sacred. Upstairs, the phone buzzed, once a news alert, or maybe nothing. She didn't check. Her fingers traced the spine of the notebook. No one had forced her to dig. No one had told her to keep going. Yet she was already this deep, and beneath concrete ash and the names they'd tried to erase the past pressed harder, waiting its turn above ground. By morning, the past arrived clothed in legal ink. An envelope sat on the counter, cream-colored crisp, stamped with official seals. Marlene turned it twice before slicing it open. Inside, a letter from Miriam's attorney, notice of intent to evict, attached a civil claim arguing the house was part of unresolved inheritance, ancestral property, never lawfully conveyed. She read it once, then again. Each time her hands grew colder. At the table, Toby colored a flyer for the school's harvest fair, humming to himself. She kept silent. Not yet. By mid-morning, her car was parked near the county legal aid office. She sat staring through the windshield at a broken plastic pumpkin swaying from a lamppost, grinning like it knew something she didn't. The receptionist barely glanced up. "You'll want Richard Coulter, third door on the left." Richard looked like he hadn't seen sunlight in weeks. His office smelled faintly of reheated soup. Marlene placed the eviction notice and the old transfer deed on his desk. He skimmed them, one brow lifting. This handwritten deed, was it ever filed with the county? No. But then it's not enforceable, he cut in firm but not unkind. "I'm sorry. Without an official record, the Hartleys can argue ownership. If they prove it's inherited and undivided, they've got standing." Marlene sat very still. "Even if they've never lived there, never paid taxes on it," he shrugged, weary. "The burden's on you to prove otherwise. And without digital records, it'll be an uphill climb." Clouds hung low and colorless. Not storm clouds, just the kind that lingered. She drove with the windows down anyway, letting the chill clear her head. At the school parking lot, a voice called her name. A woman in a school lanyard approached with an awkward smile. "Ms. Givens, could we speak a moment?" Her gut tightened. Toby sat waiting in the office, backpack on his lap, eyes red but dry. The counselor sat nearby, hands folded. "There's been chatter online. Some parents are concerned. Given the press and the situation at home, we think it's best Toby stays out of class today." Marlene didn't argue. She only took his hand. He said nothing on the way home. Not a word. That evening, rain whispered against the roof. She stood in the cellar again. The still was cold. The air smelled of old copper and charcoal. She stacked kindling, struck a match. Flame flickered, caught. Toby sat on the bottom step, knees to his chest. "Am I going to have to switch schools again?" She knelt, adjusting airflow beneath the burner. "I don't know yet." His chin rested on his arms. "Why do they hate us so much?" Marlene kept her eyes on the flame, watching it stretch and curl before settling. Hands moved on instinct, pouring, adjusting wiping glass. "They don't hate us," she murmured. "They just need us to stay small, quiet, out of the way." Why? So they can pretend they're still right. The burner crackled, heat spreading through the room. "Are we going to leave again?" he asked. The question hung heavy like steam in the air. Marlene rose, turned to him fully. Her voice was quiet but steady. "You can be mad at me. You can even hate me for a while if you need. But I won't let them push us out again. Not this time." Toby's gaze fell to the notebook on the counter. "Even if we lose..." She adjusted the lid on the condenser coil. "Then we lose loud." Neither moved at first. Then he stood, walked toward her, and without a word picked up a pencil, copying her temperature notes into a fresh page. The fire beneath the still hummed, steady, throwing warm light against stone walls. Outside, rain kept falling, indifferent, unbroken. And down in the cellar, among copper coils and the scent of oak, Marlene's resolve hardened, no longer hidden, no longer waiting. A week later, that resolve carried her into town hall. Folding chairs scraped across the floor like dry bones. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, sharp enough to grate. Marlene stood at the back, clutching a rolled flyer so tightly her knuckles whitened. At the front, Brent adjusted the mic with practiced ease. Denim shirt, pressed boots polished, not the ones he used to wear for repairs. Miriam sat beside him, lipstick the shade of fresh bruises. "We believe it's time to honor what's been neglected," Brent said, voice calm, almost soothing. "Our family home has stood long enough in disrepair. We plan to restore it, turn it into something the town can be proud of." A few heads nodded. "We envision a heritage site, tours, tastings, events celebrating old traditions." He paused, letting the words settle. Miriam smiled, folding her hands with rehearsed charm. Marlene stepped forward. No one called on her. She didn't wait. "Interesting," she said, voice steady though thin. You didn't seem to care about that land until someone made it useful again. Brent blinked. Excuse me, I've lived there for months, she pressed on. Alone with my son. That house, your so-called legacy, was rotting when I arrived. Now you want it back because I scraped something meaningful from its bones. Murmurs rippled through the room. Chairs shifted. Miriam rose. You're exploiting a dead man's name, she said coldly. Martin Hale was family by blood. You're no one. You trespassed. You took something that wasn't yours. Marlin turned toward her. You mean the man whose name never appeared on your family tree until there was profit to be made? I've got his notebook. His still. His words. Miriam's lips curled. You think that makes you righteous? You're a squatter with a liquor license no one can find. Someone in the crowd chuckled. Another looked away. I never claimed to be anything but someone who stayed when no one else would, Marlin replied, quieter now. Brent leaned toward the mic. We're not here to argue. This meeting is about community restoration. No, she cut in. This meeting is about control. You don't want the house, you want the story, the image, and you can't stand that a woman like me got to it first. Miriam stepped closer, voice rising. You're nothing but a bitter ex-wife stirring mud. You should have left when the judge gave you that shell of a house. Instead, you turn it into a circus and cry when the law calls you out. Silence snapped across the room. Marlene stood rigid, throat-tight eyes, scanning for just one face not twisted in judgment. None met hers. She walked out without looking back. The parking lot smelled of wet leaves and engine oil. A street lamp buzzed weakly overhead as her boots splashed through puddles that reflected nothing. At home, the porch light flicked on as she approached. Toby sat curled on the sofa, a blanket draped around his shoulders. He didn't ask. He'd probably already seen clips online. She poured water into the kettle with unsteady hands, palms still clammy from the town hall air. The hush in the room pressed close, thicker than walls. Later, when the floorboards quieted, she felt him in the doorway. Toby lingered at the edge, hesitant. Then he crossed the room. No words. His arms wrapped around her middle forehead, pressed to her ribs. He didn't apologize. He didn't need to. Marlin froze. Months had passed since they'd touched without urgency, no rushed coats, no school bags. Just contact. Real, unfiltered. Her arms stayed stiff. Then slowly she let one hand rest on his back. The fabric was warm under her fingers. She curled them, pulled him closer. She didn't cry. But her breath left shaky and she didn't send him to bed right away. Downstairs, the still waited the scent of mash woven into the boards. By morning, quiet broke into something harsher. The video surfaced just after dawn, grainy phone footage playing on loop in a local Facebook group. Brent leaned toward a reporter voice, low but cutting. She's always had issues. I gave her the house because I felt sorry for her. Thought maybe some quiet would help. Comments piled up. A few sympathetic, most not. Marlin watched twice, then shut the laptop. Her palms stayed pressed to the table, trying to anchor to something solid, something hers. She hadn't seen Denny in 3 days. No calls. No notes. At first she told herself he was busy. Then she noticed the half-built railing still stacked in the shed. She drove to town more reflex than plan. At the lumberyard, his truck sat in its usual spot, but at the office window, the manager only gave a stiff smile. Denny's out back, he said without looking up. She found him near the delivery dock, sawing with slow, deliberate strokes, more counting seconds than cutting wood. He flinched when he saw her. I thought you were sick, she said. He wiped his hands on a rag. I didn't know how to tell you. They warned me if I kept helping, I'd lose my biggest contract. That's half the shop's income, Marlene. People depend on me. You think I don't? Her voice stayed level sharper than a shout. You think I'm doing this for fun? I think he said quietly. You're walking into a storm with a paper umbrella. She left without goodbye. At home, she rummaged through the wooden chest that had held Martin's journal, searching for distraction, maybe a sign. Faded envelopes lay crammed among tools and jars of cracked wax. Bills, receipts, grocery lists. One envelope stood out sealed in brittle wax, Brent's name written in careful cursive. A folded letter lay on yellowed paper. The ink had bled slightly with age, but the words held. Brent, you think you'll inherit by waiting long enough? You think people forget. If your family ever touches this land again, If I so much as hear your name in connection to it, I'll make sure this whole town remembers exactly who you are and what you've done. M. Ana. She read the letter 3 times. It wasn't just a warning, it hinted at something buried before, a feud, a threat, turned binding by intention. The door creaked. Toby hovered in the hallway sketchpad clutched to his chest. Is it true what they said online? Marlene tucked the letter behind her. What did they say that you stole the house? That you lied to the judge? That Dad gave it to you because you were sick? A bitter laugh scraped her throat. They don't know what they're talking about. He shifted. Then why doesn't anyone say that out loud? The pause between them weighed more than the letter itself. That night she returned to the cellar. Air cool, sharp with fermentation. Her second batch lined the bench in reused jars, blank labels, liquid golden and clear. She lit the lamp, set the letter beside Martin's journal. If she carried this to the sheriff, the fallout was unpredictable. Brent had influence. Miriam had council allies. The sheriff hunted on Hartley land. But this page, this scrap of truth from a man lost to fire and silence, was proof of rot older than her. From the stairs came Toby's voice. Mom. She didn't answer at first. Fingers hovered above the jars. Are we still going to stay here? She looked up. His face was pale in the lamplight eyes, too serious for his age. Crossing the room, she knelt in front of him. People will talk, she said, and some of it will be cruel. But you and I, we know the truth, don't we? Toby nodded once. She drew him into her arms, his shoulders tense at first, then softening. Above them, the wind rattled the broken pantry window. She held him tighter, gaze fixed on the journal, and let her 2 fragments of a history she hadn't chosen, but maybe was ready to finish. Later that night, both journal and letter went back down with her. The room hummed faintly with the old tape player. Dust swirled in her flashlight beam as she crouched at the workbench, hands trembling over a cassette Toby had found weeks ago. At the time, she'd brushed it aside. Now she pressed play. A man's voice, cracked with age, filled the cellar. I don't make liquor for money. I make it so I don't forget who I am. The burn in your throat, that's not fire. That's memory. Marlene closed her eyes. She could almost see Martin Hale standing in this space speaking into a recorder, while copper coils hissed behind him. Tired, worn yet steady. The words seeped into her ribs like warmth after frost. She opened a drawer, pulled out the bundle she had stashed after the last blow, Hale's letter to Brent, the deed in Ellis Carter's name, and now the recording. Laid together, they no longer looked like relics. They looked like ammunition. Before doubt could creep in, she packed them into a weatherproof folder, then scribbled a note for Toby back before dinner. Soup in fridge. Don't answer the door. The road to Elkford twisted through wooded hills. 45 minutes of pine shadows later, she parked behind a low-rise law office out of town, enough to escape local ties. The building looked like it had once been a vet clinic, awnings faded, mailbox crooked. At the front desk, the secretary barely glanced up. A tall woman with dark curls emerged. Janelle Carr. Her demeanor shifted when her eyes landed on the folder. You didn't get this from court records, no. It was sealed in a book. Hidden. Janelle thumbed through the photocopies, brow creasing. This deed is legitimate. But Ellis Carter, there's no probate. He died without heirs. Then the land sits in limbo, which means Brent Hartley has no claim. Marlene's hands tightened on the chair, but Janelle went on. If we file, it goes public. They'll push back. Hard. What if I don't? Then you stay quiet. They take the land. Maybe you last until they win it in court. Maybe not. Either way, they'll smear you. Marlene exhaled through her nose. The clock ticked. Blinds rattled with a passing gust. I'll need to testify, she said. Yes. I'll need to say what they've done. Janelle met her eyes. You will. And it won't be easy. Marlene pictured Toby's face when the school pulled him from class. The heat in her gut had shifted, no longer shame, but a decision settling deep. She laid the tape recorder on the desk. This is his voice, Martin Hale. He built that place. Not for profit, not for the Hartleys. He didn't want it swallowed. Janelle nodded slowly. We can start paperwork tomorrow. As she drove home late, sunlight filtered through branches like veins of fire. The leaves had begun to turn at the edges, a seasonal shift subtle yet steady. On the porch, Toby sat cross-legged, her note crumpled in his fist. He glanced up as she parked, but didn't speak. She joined him on the steps. After a pause, he asked, "Are they going to kick us out?" She shook her head. "Not if I tell the truth." He stared ahead, then reached into his hoodie pocket and handed her something. The cork from her second batch cracked at the top, still faintly smelling of oak and smoke. "Thought you'd want it," he mumbled. Marlin turned it over in her palm the way someone might hold a stone they'd once tripped on. At the edge of the porch, the woods whispered in the wind. She didn't know what came next. She rose and Toby followed. A week later, what came next was the courthouse. The room carried the scent of varnish and old paper. Marlene sat stiff on a wooden bench, the folder in her lap, nearly worn through from use. The county courthouse wasn't much, just rows of mismatched chairs beneath buzzing fluorescent lights, but it felt like a stage she had never meant to step onto. The bailiff called the session to order. She rose when summoned. Her hands stayed steady, not because fear had vanished. Fear had already burned through her like fire across a field. What remained was ash and something solid beneath. At the front, Janelle presented the evidence piece by piece. First, the deed transferring land to Ellis Carter. Then the letter from Martin Hale to Brent Hartley, dated and signed in uneven ink. Finally, the audio. Martin's voice poured through courtroom speakers, tired yet unshaken. "I didn't build that place for profit, and if anyone from that family tries to carve it up, they'll answer for it." A murmur swept the room. Marlene didn't turn to see who made it. The last item was the county land map from 1972 showing the overlooked parcel, once Hale's, then Ellis Carter's, never properly conveyed. Janelle's tone never wavered. "For 30 years, this land has been misrepresented. My client didn't steal it. She lived there, repaired it, and uncovered the truth no one else bothered to find." Brent shifted. Miriam's lips went bloodless. Asked for comment. Brent leaned forward and said almost casual, "She's unstable. Everyone in town knows it." Janelle didn't flinch. Defamation isn't a defense. The judge retired with the documents. 10 minutes stretched like hours. Marlene sat alone, staring at her white-knuckled hands. When he returned, his face gave nothing away. "Pending investigation, I grant a temporary injunction, preventing transfer or development of the property. The documents suggest material misrepresentation by the Hartley family. This matter will also be referred to the district attorney's office for possible criminal review." Miriam's jaw dropped. Brent didn't blink. The gavel fell. Not loud, but final. Marlin didn't cry. Janelle touched her elbow briefly before turning to the clerks. Reporters lingered near the door's bloggers, who once mocked her, now whispering among themselves. She passed without slowing. The doors opened to weak winter sun, just warm enough to melt the frost on the steps. At the bottom, Toby waited, hoodie-drawn, tied eyes scanning faces. She went straight to him. "Is it over?" he asked. "Not yet, but they know now." He reached for her hand. At first she hesitated. Then she wrapped her fingers around his. He gave a small, unexpected squeeze. From across the street, a camera clicked. A woman from the Elkford Gazette, maybe. Marlin didn't care. Headlines would twist as they pleased. But this time the record carried more than rumor. There were signatures, maps, a voice from the grave. They turned toward the car. Traffic rolled by as if nothing had shifted. A man unloaded groceries. A kid coasted past on a skateboard. Flags tugged on light poles in the wind. At the crosswalk, a stranger nodded. She didn't nod back. Yet something in her spine straightened. That night back at the house, the cellar pressed heavy with stillness. A single draft slipped through the stone seams, stirring a ragged tarp in the corner. Marlene sat on the last stair, the groan of old wood barely registering. The trial was done. The town had gone quiet. But in her chest, something unfinished still rattled for release. She reached for the small wooden box that held the notebook. Its spine was brittle corners, curled from damp air and time. No recipes tonight, no calculations. No notes in the margins. Her thumb traced the back cover's lining until she found the page she hadn't touched since Toby first helped her clear the cellar. She peeled it carefully, tape crackling as it gave way. A yellowed slip, barely the size of her palm, revealed one sentence in dark ink, blurred at the edges. "I once thought of burning this whole place down. Then I figured maybe it just needs to wait for the right person." She didn't smile, but her shoulders loosened, the ache in her ribs easing. A candle flickered to life, the squat one she always used during storms. The flame wavered once, then steadied, casting warmth across the clutter. Copper patched with wire, wooden barrels leaking at the seams, stacks of faded labels she had never thrown away. Her movement slowed. She set bottles on the shelf by height, straightened a pile of coasters, wiped dust from the ledge where Martin had scrawled ratios in chalk. These weren't junk anymore. They marked a thread, a line carried forward. From a box of cracked stoppers, she matched pieces to jars that had long sat unused. Some she tossed aside. Others she rinsed and dried with the hem of her shirt. A floorboard shifted above. Footsteps followed. She didn't startle. Then Toby's voice, faint but calm. "Mom, can we have fries tonight?" Her hand paused on a tray. A beat passed before she answered. Voice raised just enough to carry up. "Yeah, fries sound good." His steps retreated lighter now, like he wasn't afraid of making noise. She stood in the center of the room and let the hush return, not heavy but full. On the bench, her fingers traced burn marks and water stains. They no longer bothered her. This place had been someone's redemption, once someone else's secret. Now, without asking, it had become her anchor. She opened to a clean page, not to mimic Martin's handwriting, not to repeat his blends. Her pencil began a list, not of ingredients, but of names. People who had helped, people who hadn't. Suppliers she might call, dates worth digging through, jar designs she might sketch if courage allowed her to bottle under her own label. A to-do list meant not just to survive, but to continue. The candle flame trembled as if in approval. At the top of the page, she wrote notes for the next chapter. She tapped the pencil against her chin, then crossed out notes. Wrote instead plans. The candle sputtered once, but held. Weeks later, those plans carried her back to the courthouse. The building emptied like air from a long-held breath. Reporters packed up tripods and microphones, voices dropping as they moved on to other stories. No handcuffs, no arrest, only the shuffle of papers and the murmur of clerks closing another case. Miriam Hartley lingered in the hall to the very end, lips tight, blazer, perfect, her expression unreadable. An officer handed her an envelope, not a sentence but a summons. The charges weren't dramatic yet. They carried weight: submission of altered documents, obstruction of records. Brent wasn't there. He had slipped out the back earlier with a suit bag under one arm, muttering about starting over in Nevada. When Marlene stepped through the doors, the air felt changed, not lighter, not sweeter, but edged with uncertainty. Justice carried silence along with it. A Channel 7 reporter lifted her mic. "Ms. Marlene, would you be willing to share?" No, her tone was firm, not harsh. "I'm not a story." The reporter lowered her mic and stepped aside. A clerk handed over a folder. The court order inside confirmed ownership of the house and the adjoining land. But there was more: recognition of her right to use the name Martin Hale in a non-commercial capacity, citing legacy and historical protection. Not trademark, not leverage, dignity. She held the folder to her chest. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like breath. Enough to keep going. Footsteps sounded to her left. She braced herself, expecting another stranger. But it was Mr. Kenner, the old librarian, still in his frayed wool vest, head tilted with quiet curiosity. "Didn't expect to see you here," she said. He gave a small nod. "Didn't expect to be here. But I figured, if someone was finally going to speak for Martin, I should bear witness." Her smile was slight, but it carried gratitude. His gaze dropped to the folder in her hands, then shifted toward the lot where Toby waited in Denny's truck. "I always wondered what happened to that place," Kenner said softly. "That cellar's held more secrets than this town likes to admit." Marlene didn't answer right away. Her eyes followed a leaf sliding across the pavement, carried by a breeze that hadn't been there when they first entered the courthouse. "Do you still run the community exhibit space?" she asked. At the library, Kenner raised a brow. "Depends. Thinking of putting something in it if there's room," she said. "Maybe a bottle or two." His mouth twitched. "If moonshine's involved, the doors are always open." They stood a moment longer, the pause stretching, but never uncomfortable. Behind her, a lock turned on the courthouse door. The latch clicked shut, punctuation on a chapter she had never wanted to write, but had chosen to finish. She walked toward the truck, folder tucked under her arm. Toby sat in the back, fiddling with his hoodie zipper. Denny leaned against the side mirror, arms folded, waiting with a patience he never named. Marlin opened the door, slid in, and glanced once more at the building behind them. No one followed. No cameras, no crowd. Just a small family driving home on an ordinary Thursday. Except now the house at the edge of the woods wasn't just a reminder of what she'd endured. It was hers. Weeks later, enough shifted into a beginning. The tent wasn't much canvas pulled over a wooden frame, a strip of tin roofing that clattered when the wind turned. But it stood steady beside the cellar door, rooted enough to show someone cared. A long pine table scarred from its past life stretched across the space. Carboys gleamed at one end, scrubbed clean. A worn chalkboard hung crooked above them, smudged but legible. In white, uneven lines, someone had written, "Not for those who wish to forget." Marlene arranged a set of copper tools on the table. Afternoon light angled through the plastic window dust, spinning in the beam like gold. Her hands moved with certainty now. This wasn't a distillery, not a business, just a place to begin again. The women arrived one at a time, some curious, some guarded. None paid, none signed. But they listened. They watched as Marlene showed how to pour mash test temperature, noticed the shift when vapor became something stronger. They spoke little that first session, not about reasons. Not yet. Toby sat cross-legged in the corner, tongue poking out as he labeled jars with a black marker. Each bore only a date. When the group drifted out into the gravel lot, some smiling, some quiet in a different way, he carried a hand-painted sign to the road and nailed it to the post, "Widow's Reserve, not for sale," for starting over. A week passed, then two. Rain came on a Tuesday, light at first, then quick and cold. Marlin worked beneath the tent when the first leak appeared above the coil. She cursed to set a pot under it. Another leak sprang in the corner. Toby ran in with buckets, and together they chased the water, laughing more than the moment deserved. "This place is gonna drown," he said, catching a drop on his forehead. She tossed him a towel. "Then we'll float." That evening, when the buckets had gone still, Marlin lingered at the still. The last mash turned, while flame curled gentle under the kettle. The scent filled the space, sweet, sharp old. She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. No music. No applause. No declaration. Only the sound of fire breathing through copper glass, ticking with each drop, canvas walls, creaking when the wind pressed them. She steadied the funnel, poured, and listened as each drop echoed into the jar like a forgotten clock. In the small square window above the bench, the sun dropped behind the tree-line gold, turning molten before it thinned away. The same spot where she and Toby had once stood, uncertain on their first day here. Now it felt different, not safer, not easier, but earned. She capped the jar, wiped her palms on her jeans, and let the still exhale in quiet. Outside, the trees swayed. The storm had passed, and here there was work yet to be done. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought in courtrooms or crowds, but in places like this, a cellar beneath your feet, or a voice deep in your chest reminding you not to give up. This story reminds us you don't need to burn the past to rise from it. Sometimes you just need to distill it into something stronger. If this story moved you, don't forget to follow our channel. More true-to-the-bone tales of resilience are coming your way.